The sky above Charon 6 wasn't just burning, it was unraveling. Ribbons of flame danced across the upper atmosphere, not from natural weather systems or solar flares, but from the torn guts of Dominion warships spiraling into oblivion. The great orbital ring, once the gleaming crown of Thalcor engineering, now floated in pieces, its core reactors venting iridescent plasma like the entrails of a slain titan. Over 17,000 kilometers wide, the ring had been a symbol of absolute control, locking the sky with layered cannon arrays and planetary shielding. Now it was dying, its fragments casting long, flickering shadows on the scorched terrain below. Vexor stood rooted behind a jagged basalt ridge, his pulse pounding against the inside of his helmet like a war drum. Dust choked the air, static filled his comms. His armored fingers clenched tighter around the grip of his gravpike, a ceremonial weapon now slick with grime and the memories of battles he no longer felt proud of. Around him, 7 fellow Thalcor warriors shifted nervously, each of them twitching at phantom sounds and false motion. They were the 8th Talon, elite soldiers born on the fortress world of Draxus, tempered in fire, decorated across 7 campaigns. Their armor shimmered faintly in the heat haze, an iridescent black and bronze mix of living metal and reactive plating. They weren't just soldiers, they were apex predators in a species bred for conquest. And yet, here they crouched, hiding, their breath shallow and ragged. They were waiting, listening, dreading the next move in a battle that no longer obeyed their rules. Vexor's HUD lit up again. Movement. At first, just a blip. Faint, erratic, like a scavenger drone running low on charge. Then more. The signature. Split. 2 signals, then 3, 4. It wasn't a malfunction, it was a maneuver the humans were circling. Impossible, hissed Kator, his voice buzzing through the squad channel. They were retreating. We saw them fall back an hour ago. We pushed them to the ridgeline. They had nowhere to run. Vexor didn't answer. His mandibles flexed instinctively, the Thalcor equivalent of a grimace. Every instinct in his war-hardened brain screamed at him that something was wrong, not tactically but fundamentally. The human forces weren't behaving like soldiers. They weren't obeying the flow of battle as understood by Dominion doctrine. They'd broken formation early, abandoned cover, scattered like prey animals. Except now they weren't retreating, they were behind them. This wasn't flight. It was a trap. A cold realization settled over him like the frost of a cryo chamber. It wasn't that the humans had no strategy, it was that they had dozens, and they cycled through them like second skin. Retreat was an illusion. Surrender, a mask. Desperation, just camouflage for something far more dangerous. Deliberate misdirection. Vexor opened his mouth to warn the others, but that was when the ridge behind them detonated. No warning. No countdown, just violence. The explosion wasn't massive, but it was precise. An engineered collapse, a shaped charge buried into the brittle stone hours ago. Perhaps days. Perhaps when the humans fled. The blast hurled tons of obsidian into the air. Shards howled like banshees, slicing through armor seams and joints. Vexor hit the ground hard, his vision swarming with static as his HUD attempted to recalibrate. From the smoke emerged death, not hulking tanks or towering mechs, but something far worse. Fast, silent, human. The first one moved like a blur of matte black motion, coil blade humming at a pitch that cut through both air and sanity. He struck Kator with surgical precision, one slash severing the spine joint, another carving into the fuel cell in his shoulder mount. Kator dropped, without a sound. The second human emerged from the flank, sidestepping a plasma bolt and unleashing a burst of magnetic flechettes. The round struck 2 Thalcor mid-torso, punching through their chest armor and exiting through their backplates. No theatrics, just efficiency, predatory efficiency. "Where's their support?" someone screamed across the channel. "Where's their command unit?" But the humans had no command visible. They had no walkers, no exosuits. Just these operatives, slipping through smoke and blood like phantoms with guns. It wasn't a battle, it was a culling. Vexor scrambled for cover, his gravpike spinning up, but he was met with a concussive blast, a sphere of energy that rippled. through his systems and shut down his suit's mobility servos. He crumpled, paralyzed, as another human stepped into view. This one paused, helmet visor reflecting fire and stars, and simply looked at him. There was no hatred in that stare. No cruelty, just cold assessment, tactical evaluation. Vexer wasn't a foe to be hated. He was a problem to be solved. Then darkness claimed him. When he awoke, he lay inside a Dominion triage chamber, cold metal beneath his body, synthetic antiseptic burning his lungs. His limbs ached. His left eye refused to open. Medical drones buzzed around his wounds, sealing ruptures and injecting pain suppressants. He wasn't alone. Dozens of soldiers filled the chamber, most in worse shape than him. Shattered armor, burned flesh. Many had no physical injuries at all, just blank stares and trembling claws. They weren't wounded, they were broken. Across Charon 6, similar stories echoed. From orbital command down to the planetary trenches, survivors whispered about human tactics like ghost stories, about how they attacked from impossible angles, about how they vanished when cornered, only to reappear behind you, above you, inside your blind spot. The Dominion had faced hundreds of species, some strong, some fast. Some gifted with weapons that bent space-time and minds alike, but none like humanity, because humans didn't follow predictable logic. They didn't operate within the comfort of doctrine. They adapted. They changed on the fly, improvised. They made chaos a strategy. And most terrifying of all, humans don't flee. They flank. The morning after the battle, Vexer found himself staring at the ruins of what had once been a fortified military compound, an intricate network of trenches, barricades, and automated turrets designed to withstand orbital bombardment and ground assault. Yet here it was, now a graveyard of smoldering wreckage, with human footprints scattered across the still warm earth like remnants of a ghostly parade. The weapons the Dominion had used, hypervelocity rifles, plasma launchers, and grenade clusters, had been abandoned, left to rust and corrode beneath the unforgiving Charon 6 sun. Yet the humans had left nothing. No trace of their passage except the inevitable chaos they had unleashed. Vexer's armored boots crunched over the ashen surface as he walked toward the command center, or what was left of it. The walls, once fortified with a blend of energy shielding and reinforced steel, were now peppered with smoldering craters, some of which had melted the very ground into glass-like puddles. Above, the skies were empty. Not a single Thal core ship remained in orbit. Every fleet carrier, every tactical cruiser had been destroyed or forced to retreat. Even the autonomous repair drones sent to rebuild the shattered orbital platforms had been systematically dismantled by human technology. Impossible, Vexer muttered under his breath, his words barely audible through the suit's internal systems. He had been through wars before, many wars, but never had he seen a force so small, so seemingly insignificant, reduce a mighty empire to this. The retreat was calculated. The decision to withdraw wasn't born of fear, but of necessity. The Dominion had underestimated humanity's ingenuity, and now they were paying the price. There was no military power left in the sector to reinforce Charon 6, and what made it worse, what made the situation untenable, was that the humans didn't appear to have the same weaknesses that every other species had. They didn't rely on grand armies or fleets. Their weapons weren't vast, yet their strategy was flawless. How had they done it? Vexer paused at the edge of a crater, staring down at the charred remnants of what had been one of the Dominion's most advanced battle drones, a massive quadrupedal war machine designed to engage in orbital combat and planetary assault. Its exoskeletal frame, built from adamantine alloys, had once been impervious to enemy fire. Now it was nothing more than a mangled heap of twisted metal and severed limbs. But even more chilling was the precision of the destruction. The weapons systems had been surgically disabled, the targeting systems erased. It was as though the humans had studied this thing, knew how it worked and knew exactly how to bring it down with minimal effort. A flicker of movement caught his attention. He turned sharply, his grav pike instantly rising to a ready position, yet there was no immediate threat. Instead, standing in the shadows of the ruined facility, A solitary human figure emerged. He was unarmed, no visible armor, no fleet insignia, just a silhouette against the fire-ravaged landscape. He wore a dark hood, his face hidden beneath a layer of dust and sweat, but Vexor knew immediately what he was seeing. One of them, a scout. A human scout, so unlike the warriors Vexor was accustomed to fighting. This figure was smaller, less imposing. But even in the dim light, Vexor could see the sharpness of the eyes, the calculating intelligence that radiated from the human like an electrical pulse. This scout wasn't here to fight. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to observe. The scout's lips barely moved, but the words came through the comms in a cold, direct tone. Your forces are scattered, and your leadership is in disarray. You're retreating, and yet you stand here holding on to what's left of your pride. His voice was unshaken, devoid of arrogance, but there was an underlying certainty to it. You should be glad we're leaving your planet intact. You'd be amazed at what we could do to it, if we had a reason to. Vexor felt a surge of rage bubble up inside him, but he forced himself to calm. The human spoke with no fear, no hesitation. They knew how to play on the psychological front, but that wasn't the worst part. What Vexor hadn't expected was the eerie quietness that followed the scout's words. There was no mocking tone, no superiority, just the harsh reality of a species that had studied, assessed, and calculated every move long before the first shot had been fired. You're learning too late, Vexor finally managed to say. His voice was low, though there was an edge of cold steel to it. We'll rebuild. We will strike back, and we'll bring down your forces like we always do. You've simply bought yourselves a brief respite. The scout tilted his head as though weighing Vexor's words carefully. I wonder, he said softly, what would happen if your empire had truly studied us before this war started? If you had understood how we fight, how we think? A sudden realization gripped Vexor, a thought so profound, so unsettling that it nearly paralyzed him. The Dominion, like every other conqueror in the galaxy, had approached war with a predictable mindset. The strategy was always the same: overwhelming firepower, brute force, and unrelenting dominance. They hadn't needed to adapt. They had resources and technology to destroy everything in their path. They were the apex predators. But the humans? They didn't just fight wars. They evolved during them. Their tactics shifted like the ebb and flow of tides. Today they would be in one place, fighting a direct engagement with shock troops. Tomorrow they'd be lying in ambush, waiting for the perfect moment to strike from an entirely unexpected angle. Their technology wasn't always superior in sheer destructive force, but it was superior in flexibility. The scout turned his back to Vexor and began walking toward the ruins of an old weapons cache. The flicker of movement in his peripheral vision wasn't lost on Vexor. More humans were emerging from the shadows. 3, 4 more, each one moving with a calm precision, completely in tune with their surroundings. They weren't here to take prisoners or make demands. They were waiting. And that was the most terrifying realization of all. The humans didn't need to win every battle. They didn't need to outgun their enemies at every turn. What they needed, what they thrived on, was outthinking their foes. They adapted to their enemy, learned their weaknesses, and then struck from the most unexpected direction possible. When they retreated, they weren't running. They were luring their enemies into traps. And when they flanked, they didn't just win battles. They changed the very rules of warfare. Vexor's heart sank. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun. The sun dipped below the jagged horizon, casting long, twisted shadows over the battlefield. Smoke still rose from the debris of what had once been an impregnable base, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt metal and scorched earth. Yet, amidst the wreckage, the humans had already begun to rebuild. Not the base. There was no need for that, but something far more insidious, a strategy. Vexor's mind raced as he sat in the command module of the Dominion warship, staring at the tactical displays in front of him. The screens flickered with the glowing holographic models of the sector, showing troop movements, damaged ships, and scattered fleet formations. His empire, vast and powerful, was fractured in a way it had never been before. The humans, with their small numbers and seemingly primitive technology, had managed to disrupt everything. And the worst part, the Dominion wasn't even sure where they were anymore. "They're all over the place," Vexor muttered to himself, his fingers tapping nervously against the command table. "They're not following any standard protocol." His second-in-command, a seasoned warrior named Zir, stood by his side. Her angular face was a mask of calm, but even she couldn't hide the tension in her voice. "We've lost contact with 5 of our frontline units, sir. They were scheduled to report an hour ago. The last transmissions, they were incomplete." "Fragmented." "Fragmented?" Vexor asked sharply. "What do you mean?" Zir hesitated, then pointed at a screen showing one of the human scouting vessels, an unmarked ship that had been drifting just outside their sensors' reach. "The last known contact from our forward position was a distress signal, scrambled. There's no signature, no trace of the enemy, but everything they've left behind is a trail. A series of signals, like breadcrumbs." Vexor's mind whirred. "Breadcrumbs," he whispered, realizing the chilling implication. The humans weren't just hiding, they were leading them on a path. A carefully constructed trail designed to do one thing: separate them, scatter them, divide the Dominion. Forces. It was one thing to fight an enemy that relied on brute force and predictable tactics. The Thalcor Dominion had fought those wars and won time and again. It was another thing entirely to fight a force that understood how to exploit not just the terrain, but the very weaknesses in their opponent's psychology. The humans knew how to manipulate perception, how to lure an enemy into overextending itself. It wasn't just a war of weapons, it was a war of minds. Vexor looked at the image of the ship again. The human vessel wasn't anything impressive on its own. It was small, unassuming, almost laughable in its simplicity. But that was the point. It was so insignificant that the Dominion had dismissed it entirely, thinking it nothing more than an outlier, a stray signal that would soon fade. But now it was at the heart of everything. "Track it," Vexor ordered, his voice tinged with urgency. "Find out where it came from. Every detail, Zir. Don't miss anything." Zir's hands flew over the console, her eyes narrowing as the ship's trajectory was plotted in real time. The coordinates were baffling. The ship's path seemed random, erratic even. But then, like a bolt of lightning in the darkness, the pattern became clear. Each seemingly random jump, each seemingly disconnected movement, was carefully calculated. They were placing human ships in the gaps between Dominion forces, exploiting the moments when their tactical fleets were spread thin. The humans were in their element now. They had turned their weakness, limited numbers, into their greatest strength. The Dominion had grown used to overwhelming force, to being able to rely on sheer firepower to win the day. But the humans weren't about that. Instead, they capitalized on the very nature of conflict itself, disruption. The Dominion's forces were now acting as if they were chasing phantoms, reacting to misinformation, battling shadows of their own creation. Vexor's mind shifted back to the scout he had seen earlier, the solitary figure amidst the ruin. The humans weren't just fighting a war of attrition, they were playing a much deeper game. Each of them, whether they were a soldier, a scout, or a commander, was an expert at their craft. They didn't just flank in battle, they flanked the very concept of war itself. They didn't give their enemy time to think, to anticipate. They attacked the nerves of uncertainty, of doubt. As Vexor pondered this realization, the flashing red lights on the tactical screen grabbed his attention. One of the fleet's forward recon units had encountered resistance, sudden, overwhelming, and utterly unexpected. The reports were fragmented, but the consensus was chilling. The humans had already infiltrated the supply line. They hadn't waited for a full-scale confrontation. Instead, they had simply walked in, quietly, stealthily, and planted themselves in the heart of the Dominion's logistics hub. "Deploy countermeasures now," Vexor barked, his earlier composure cracking. "We can't let them establish a foothold." But as the orders were relayed, something gnawed at him. A creeping sense of dread that had settled deep within his chest. The humans were always one step ahead. They had already anticipated this. They had laid the perfect trap, and the Dominion had just walked right into it. In the midst of the chaos, a cold thought crossed Vexor's mind. "They're winning, and we're losing." Zir's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, the humans have established a blockade at every critical..." junction. It's as if they knew where we would be before we even did. Vex's gaze hardened. The scope of the human strategy became clearer by the second. They weren't simply fighting for survival. They were trying to change the very nature of warfare. They were trying to break free from the centuries-old playbook of destruction that every empire, including the Dominion, had followed. Their tactical genius lay not in their firepower, but in their ability to create opportunities where there were none. And the more Vexer thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't just a battle of armies. This was the dawn of a new kind of war. He leaned forward, his fingers trembling slightly as he activated the fleet's global comms. His voice was firm, but there was an edge of resolve in it now. This ends now. We've underestimated them for far too long. It's time. We adapted. I want every fleet unit on high alert. We're not retreating. We're going to strike back hard. The humans won't flank us again. As Vexer finished his command, the hum of the command module seemed to grow louder, vibrating with the weight of the decision. The battle had reached a critical turning point, but he wasn't about to give up. Not now. But deep down, he knew something had changed. The Dominion was no longer the hunter. They were the hunted. The cold, dark expanse of space stretched endlessly before them, but for Captain Ilya Raven, the quiet hum of the Sinicide was the only sound that mattered. She stood in the command center, her eyes scanning the tactical map projected before her. The ship's sensors pulsed with raw data, the quiet blips marking the path of her ship and the surrounding dangers. They had ventured deep into Dominion territory, far beyond what had been considered safe for any human craft. But Ilya wasn't concerned about safety, not anymore. "We've got them, Captain," Lieutenant Saul said, his voice low but steady. He was younger than Ilya, but his instincts had proven invaluable in the field. "Their fleet is moving in formation, just like we predicted. They're in the trap." Ilya nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The Dominion was a massive, powerful empire, and yet here they were, humans, small in number, fragile by design, pushing back. Not through overwhelming firepower, not through sheer numbers, but through ingenuity. It was the kind of war the humans excelled at, unpredictable, relentless, and above all adaptive. The trap had been carefully set, one piece at a time. It had begun with the scattered breadcrumbs that the Dominion had ignored, ships moving erratically, seemingly lost in the vastness of space. The Dominion had chased after them, thinking it was just another foolish attempt at diversion. But the humans had planned it all. Every jump, every feint, every detour had been meticulously calculated, drawing the Dominion into the perfect position. The Dominion had underestimated them, believing their strength lay in their numbers and advanced weaponry. But the humans knew that strength, when wielded recklessly, often faltered in the face of cunning. Their greatest advantage wasn't in their military power, it was in their minds, their ability to anticipate, to predict, to see patterns where others saw only chaos. "We're in position," Ilya said, her voice calm but with a steel edge. "Deploy the first wave. Let's make them regret thinking they could ever beat us." The Sinicide wasn't the largest ship in the fleet, but its design was perfect for this kind of mission, small, fast, and deceptively powerful. It had been retrofitted with specialized cloaking technology, enabling it to slip through Dominion sensors undetected. As the first wave of human ships launched from the hangar, Ilya watched the screen carefully. They were moving into position around the Dominion's flagship, the Laritha, a massive warship that had been the cornerstone of their fleet's strength. The human ships, swarming like hornets, slipped into the shadow of the massive vessel, their cloaks making them invisible to the Dominion sensors. Ilya's mind raced as the plan unfolded. The humans weren't after a head-on confrontation, not yet. Instead, their goal was to dismantle the Dominion's infrastructure piece by piece. The first wave wasn't designed to cause massive destruction. Instead, it was a precision strike, meant to cripple the Laritha's command network, cutting off its communication with the rest of the fleet. The humans knew that once the heart of the Dominion's fleet was blind, the rest of the ships would be left vulnerable, scattered in the void like prey. "Wave 1 is in position," Saul confirmed, his voice tense with excitement. "All systems are go." Ilya's hand hovered over the activation panel, and for a brief moment, she felt the weight of the decision. This wasn't just another strike. This was the moment that would determine the entire course of the battle. If they succeeded, they would fracture the Dominion's ability to fight back, sowing chaos in their ranks. But if they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. She pressed the button. The first wave hit with surgical precision. Silent explosions erupted from within the Laretha as the cloaked human ships activated their EMPs, disabling the flagship's internal systems. Communications cut out, data streams were corrupted, and the once mighty warship became a floating husk of its former self. The Dominion fleet, once so certain of its dominance, now found itself stumbling in the dark, unable to coordinate its next move. Elia watched with a sense of grim satisfaction as the chaos unfolded on the screens before her. Dominion ships, caught in the confusion, began firing blindly at each other, their targeting systems disrupted by the sudden loss of command. The humans had planted the seed of doubt, and now it was blooming into full-blown disorder. But Elia knew this was only the beginning. The Sinocide had been the hammer. Now it was time for the humans' true strength to shine. The Dominion wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen. They would retaliate with force, brutal, unforgiving force. But the humans had already anticipated that. The second wave was already in motion. "We need to go deeper," Elia said, her voice now a command. "Take us in, right behind their lines. We're going to cripple their ability to resupply." Her crew moved, quickly, without hesitation. The Sinocide shifted its trajectory, its sleek hull cutting through the vastness of space like a predator stalking its prey. Behind them, the Dominion fleet scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. The humans had already anticipated their every move, and now they were using that knowledge to strike where it hurt the most, the heart of the Dominion's supply chains. Elia could feel the shift in momentum as they moved into position. The human ships dropped from their cloaks, emerging like shadows from the darkness. They struck with deadly precision, targeting Dominion freighters and refueling stations, cutting off their supply lines. The Dominion had relied on these ships to sustain their war effort. Without them, their entire strategy would begin to crumble. The Dominion had always been overconfident, relying on brute force and overwhelming numbers. They had failed to see that this war wasn't just about power, it was about control. And the humans knew exactly how to control a battlefield. As the second wave of attacks took hold, Elia felt the weight of what they had accomplished settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a psychological one. The Dominion wasn't simply losing ships, they were losing faith. In their eyes, the humans had become something more than just a nuisance. They were a threat, and that threat was growing with each passing minute. "Captain, we've got incoming," Saul said, his voice strained. Elia turned to see a fleet of Dominion reinforcements emerging from a nearby jump gate. The Dominion wasn't going to take this lying down. They were sending everything they had to crush the humans once and for all, but Elia wasn't concerned. She'd seen this before. The Dominion had no idea what they were walking into. "Let them come," she said, her voice calm, resolute. "We've already won." The humans had proven that they could outthink, outfight, and outmaneuver their enemies. The Dominion might have the numbers, but the humans had the one thing that could never be matched: the will to adapt, the intelligence to survive, and the courage to keep fighting, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The real battle had only just begun. The deep silence of space was shattered by the roar of battle. The Sinocide plunged through the chaos, the hum of its engines now a fierce counterpoint to the pounding of Elia's heart. In the distance, the newly arrived Dominion reinforcements, a massive, near-impervious fleet, descended like vultures on the wounded. Their warships were more advanced, their technology sharper, and their resolve unshaken. But in the cold expanse, there was something that could not be measured in mere strength: the human spirit. Elia stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the unfolding battle. The sensors painted a grim picture. Dominion ships were swarming like locusts converging on her position. Their massive flagship, the Tyrannus, appeared at the forefront of the reinforcements, its hulking form rippling with the energy of 1,000 weapons. It was the Dominion's final attempt to reclaim control, to stamp out this human insurgency with overwhelming force. But Elia wasn't afraid. She had something the Dominion never could, a strategy forged not just from the mind, but from the experience of 1,000 hard-won battles. The humans didn't run, they flanked. "Activate Phase 2, Elia ordered, her voice steady despite the rising tension in her chest. She could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on her, but there was no turning back now. The second wave of human ships had already done its part. The Dominion was fractured, its command systems crippled, its supply lines disrupted. But this final move was different. It was the one that would break the Dominion's resolve. The moment they realized that they had underestimated the human capacity for survival would be the moment they understood just how wrong they had been. "Phase 2 activated, Captain," Sal confirmed, his voice laced with urgency. "All ships are in position. We're flanking them from both sides." Elia's eyes narrowed as she watched the Dominion fleet advance, their sensors still blinded by the earlier EMP attacks. The Sinocide surged forward, its sleek silhouette blending into the dark backdrop of space. The Tyrannus loomed ahead, its weapons primed for the kill. But Elia was no longer focused on the Tyrannus. Her mind was already calculating the next steps, already adjusting to the ever-shifting dynamics of the battle. Her ships were positioned on either side of the Dominion force, waiting for the precise moment to strike. The Dominion, still disoriented by the unexpected human aggression, moved with the grace of a wounded animal. It wasn't that they lacked firepower. It was that they couldn't predict what was coming. And the humans, they were a moving storm, a force that didn't play by the Dominion's rules. For every attack the Dominion launched, the humans had already anticipated a counter. For every move the Dominion made, the humans were already one step ahead. "Now," Elia whispered to herself, as the tactical countdown in her mind reached its peak. The Sinocide lurched forward, her guns firing in rapid succession, the pulse of energy lighting up the void. The first wave of human ships launched an unexpected attack from the opposite flank, catching the Dominion off guard. The Tyrannus fired back, but its shots were wild, unfocused, scattered by the unpredictability of the assault. Human ships dodged and weaved, taking advantage of the Dominion's momentary disarray. It was a brilliant play. Elia's ships, using their superior speed and maneuverability, had drawn the Dominion into the precise positions she needed them in. With the human fleet now encircling the Tyrannus, the Dominion's fleet was trapped. The human ships, like a coil spring wound tight, were ready to snap shut on the enemy. The final blow came swiftly. From the dark, silent reaches of space, a new force arrived, a fleet of human warships, their designs sleek and deadly. They had been hiding in the shadow of a nearby asteroid field, using the natural cover to remain undetected. Now they emerged, their weapons glowing with a cold, deadly light. The Tyrannus could not react in time. A single pulse shot from one of the human ships, a shot that struck the Tyrannus at its most vulnerable point, the core reactor. The explosion was nearly instantaneous, a blinding flash that lit up the entire battlefield. The Tyrannus shuddered, its massive hull cracking as the shockwave sent ripples through the surrounding ships. The once formidable warship was now a flaming wreck, its weapons useless, its crew lost in the inferno, but the battle wasn't over. As the remnants of the Tyrannus drifted, the Dominion fleet, though shaken, was still formidable. They weren't about to surrender, not after so much had been lost. But it was too late. The first cracks in their resolve had formed, and once those cracks appeared, there was no holding back. The remaining Dominion ships faltered, their attacks losing their precision, their cohesion unraveling under the relentless human assault. Elia watched as the Sinocide danced around the remaining Dominion ships, her crew working in perfect harmony to exploit every weakness in the enemy's formation. The Dominion ships, once proud and powerful, were now like scattered pieces on a chessboard, no longer a unified threat, but an array of isolated, vulnerable targets. "Captain, they're retreating," Sal reported, his voice filled with awe. "It's over." Elia allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but she knew better than to let it consume her. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Dominion had been humbled, but their anger would burn brighter than ever. They would regroup, rearm, and return with vengeance. But for now, victory belonged to the humans. She turned her, gazed back to the remains of the Tyrannus, now drifting in the silence of space. It was a testament to the power of human adaptability. The Dominion had thought they could crush humanity beneath their heel, but what they had failed to understand was that humans never feared a fight. They didn't flee. They flanked. They adapted. And when they fought to win. The battle was over, but the universe had just learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate humanity. The fight was only beginning.